Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Tuesday Night Live for this week. It's our second last week, which is pretty sad, but we're really glad that you guys are here and joining us for tonight. We're going to have a little chat at the start, and then we're going to read the Bible, and Seno's going to give us a talk, and then we'll have the opportunity to ask questions about what's been said in the talk or about anything else you have questions about. So make sure that you've got the comment section ready to ask your questions and to have a chat with Hayley and I, who I'm going to invite on. And we would love to know your stories about your interactions with Australian wildlife. We thought of this question because it's swooping season and there are magpies everywhere. So maybe you have a story about being swooped, or maybe you've got another story about a snake or a spider or a marine creature or something else weird that the Australian wildlife has to offer. So please feel free to share those with us. But Hayley, have you got any such stories?
Not of being swooped by a magpie, no. I feel like that's the sort of thing that happens when you're a kid that rides their bike to school or down the street.
So true.
But yep. Didn't really have those opportunities, so...
That's lucky. That's good.
Yeah, it was very lucky. I had a cousin telling me a story. She was very traumatized the other day because she got swooped on her bike and fell off and hurt herself quite badly.
Oh, what? She fell off?
It was
my
awful.
Gosh.
That
is not
really
good.
Bad, thinking it was a little bit funny, but...
I don't blame you, but gosh, that's intense. I've never known a magpie to hurt someone actually seriously. That's not good.
I don't think it was a magpie. It just scared her a heap and she fell off a bike going quite fast.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Oh my goodness, poor thing. Oh dear. Have you ever had a run-in with a snake or anything?
Oh, lots of close calls with brown snakes.
Okay.
I was actually out riding on my horse one day and she came very close to stepping on a brown snake and it actually reared up and then it just took off.
Wow. Wow.
So,
gosh.
Yeah.
Don't be on a horse or a bike. Yeah, gosh. Okay. Because you grew up on a farm, right? So you would just see
lots
them
of
all.
snakes.
Yeah, gold. Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh.
What about you, Ellie?
I have never been seriously swooped by a magpie. Like, they come near me sometimes. I'm very scared of them though, so every time they come near me, I just like run fast away. But my sister got swooped once, and like its beak got her in the head and drew blood. So I think that's why I'm so scared of them, because I thought they just like went near people and didn't actually hit them. But anyway, snakes. I saved my mother from a snake one time when I was 3 years old. Kind of saved her. She was pregnant with my younger sister and she was in the chicken coop all by herself, and then there was a snake in there. She was worried she was going to miscarry, so she yelled at me to go and get Dad, and I went and got Dad, and then he killed it. So yeah, that's kind of a close call, but she was fine. We were all fine in the end. The snake got chopped in half, and that's good to a happy ending. Yes. Jess, Did you see what Jess said in the comments on Facebook? She said she's been kicked by her horse multiple times, if that counts.
Join the club.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Have you been kicked by yours?
Yeah. I actually got kicked in the head by a pony. I mean, it didn't. It was a very light kick. It sort of took me by surprise. I think he was just sort of warning me, like, get away from me. He was a bit of a nasty little pony.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah, it didn't do any harm. I don't even think I cried, so it didn't get me that bad, but it could have been quite serious.
Yeah, gosh. Wow.
But,
oh my goodness. Okay, that's not good. Horses, we'll count them. They're not Australian wildlife, but we'll count that, Jess. Oh, Tash said, so many horrible interactions with magpies. They find me and they hunt me. It's awful. What, Tash? Have you heard, Hayley, or anyone else out there, though, that if you, like, make eye contact with them and try and be friends with them, that they don't hurt you? Is that a real thing?
I have not heard that.
Oh, I've heard that. I feel like it does happen to people because when magpies are near their houses, normally they don't get swooped. But yeah, I don't know what everyone else thinks about that. I try it sometimes. I don't know if it works, but whenever I walk past a magpie, I just eyeball them like, we're going to be friends. Don't hurt me.
They're more intelligent than we give them credit for.
Yeah. They're really quite smart, I think. Jess also said her dad once had a kangaroo almost steal his chips. He was holding them and everything. A kangaroo. Oh my goodness. Jen said she loves magpies. She loves their songs. Jennifer,
Yeah, the warble
have you ever
is
been
nice.
swooped? Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. But still, I just feel like they're a bit evil. Why are they out to get us so much?
I think they're just very territorial. You
Yeah.
think of it, then maybe they've got like little babies in their nests and they just think all humans are going to like shoot them or something.
True, they're going to get them.
Or,
Okay.
you know, get them with a slingshot.
Oh, the best part about magpie swooping season is honestly watching all the bike riders go past with their little cable ties on their helmets.
or just walking through the park and the magpies are like going at them and they start running. It's so funny.
So entertaining. Oh my gosh. Leslie said magpies have really good facial recognition. Thank you, Leslie. You're proving me right, I think, maybe. We should test it one time. Tash said she had some possums steal her food when she was camping once. Oh, that's so frustrating. Why does that always happen? That's really actually sad. I'm sorry, Tash. Jen,
that's funny.
Oh my goodness. Everyone has stories. Jen said we once did have a kookaburra steal our butter at a barbecue, and she thought that was pretty rude. That is rude. I didn't know kookaburras were rude. Wow.
Oh, that's funny.
We
went camping on Kangaroo Island once, and there's lots of, not kangaroos surprisingly, but lots of wallabies that will actually come into your camp at night and eat food scraps. And then it was Easter time and a possum actually stole and ate all my sister's Easter chocolates that she left out, so that was a little bit disappointing for her.
Oh no, poor thing. That is so rotten. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Ryan, yes, good idea. There's a magpie out the front of his house and he's going to try and make friends with it. And Ben Jensen said he's had a few encounters with human beings. They can be vicious. Oh gosh. Wow. Such good stories, guys. Oh, Tim, plovers. Oh my goodness. Plovers are a whole nother story. They have spikes on their wings. Did you know that, Haley?
I did not know that. I don't even think I'd recognize a plover by sight.
Really? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Didn't you ever have them at primary school and they'd like put little witches' hats around them so that no one got swooped to death?
No, there were like 60 kids in my primary school.
Okay.
We didn't do much of that sort of stuff. There wasn't as much of a threat, and they were all little ferals anyway. So.
Oh my goodness. Maybe they deserve to get swooped.
Yeah, probably.
Oh dear. Okay. Thanks so much for your stories, guys. That was quite fun. I'm sorry to everyone who has had an unfortunate encounter with a magpie or a plover or anything else, kangaroo, possum. But Haley is going to read the Bible for us now, and then Seno is going to give us this talk. So if you've got questions, please put them in the comments in Facebook or YouTube. Thanks, Haley.
No worries. So we're going to read Luke chapter 24, 1 to verse 43. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, two men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen. Remember how he told you, while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and on the third day rise." And they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them, who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home, marveling at what had happened. That very day, two of them were going to the village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things had happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had seen, but him they did not see. And he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets had spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he was going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened up to us about the scriptures?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. As they were talking about these things, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace to you." But they were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they still disbelieved for joy and were marveling, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate before them.
The man who woke up one morning convinced he was dead. His wife thought he was joking and asked him, "Well, how can you be talking about being dead?" But it soon became clear that he was serious. He was convinced he was dead. After several attempts to talk him out of it, his wife finally called in a psychiatrist to interview him and to get him to come to his senses. But he remained convinced, "No, I am dead." So the psychiatrist had an idea. He opened a medical textbook and pointed out one of the absolute facts about dead people. Dead people don't bleed. With the heart stopped and other things happening, bleeding just isn't possible. The evidence was compelling and the man agreed dead people definitely don't bleed. At this point, the psychiatrist grabbed a pin and stabbed the man in his arm. Blood shot straight up like a tiny little fountain. The man was astonished. He looked at his arm, pumping out blood, and he said, "Well, what do you know? Dead people do bleed after all." Now, why do I tell you that story? Well, for 2,000 years now, Christians have proclaimed that the Jesus who died on a cross in Jerusalem rose from the dead just a few days later. But for as long as we've proclaimed that Jesus is risen, people have been laughing at us. And I'm conscious that there will be lots of different opinions out there about Jesus and his resurrection. I told that story not because it's true, it isn't true, but because it highlights something about all of us. For all of us, evidence isn't the only factor in the decisions that we make. Now, people often level this accusation against Christians. They often say that faith is belief despite the evidence, because Christianity is so totally unbelievable and outlandish. But it's worth noticing that the same will be true for you if you're not a Christian as well. You will doubt the resurrection, not based on the evidence, but based on assumptions you've made about whether it could be true or not, or whether God exists. And these assumptions will affect your willingness to consider the evidence as well. So what do we do when we come to the resurrection of Jesus, to a meeting like this? Well, we could simply sit in our bunkers and stick with our assumptions and kind of fire off salvos at one another. But I want to challenge you, as I challenged myself, to come out of the bunkers and to consider the evidence, to consider whether what Christians claim could possibly be true, and to consider what that might mean for you. And it's worth being clear from the outset what it is I'm claiming. When the Bible says that Jesus rose from the dead, it means that Jesus came back to life into a physical body. It doesn't mean Jesus came back as a ghost or as a spiritual force. And Luke spells this out when he tells us about Jesus coming into the house when his followers were all together. His followers thought they were seeing a ghost. And so Jesus says to them, why are you troubled? And why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It's I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see I have. Well, we're going to talk a little bit later about the response of Jesus' followers to his appearance. But notice what Luke takes pains to point out. Jesus rose bodily, as a flesh and blood person. That's what the Bible claims about the resurrection. And it's the consistent claim of the whole Bible. Jesus rose bodily. There are loads of people who say that Jesus didn't really rise and that it was only his spirit that came back, or that this is all just a metaphor that meant Jesus was with his followers in a special way in their hearts. But the Bible will have none of it. What we read in Luke and in the other Gospels are clear eyewitness accounts claiming to have seen the empty tomb and met Jesus alive again. That's what's being claimed, like it or not. So what's the evidence for that? What reason is there to believe this? Well, the first piece of evidence is the empty tomb itself. There is absolutely no doubt that the tomb Jesus was buried in, which was covered with a heavy stone, was empty on the third day, with the stone rolled away from the mouth of the cave. Now, no one at that time or since has disputed that fact, because it was there for everyone to see at the time. The only dispute is how or why the tomb came to be empty and what it might mean. So why does Luke think we should believe this? Well, one reason is because the witnesses were women. This is the very first thing Luke tells us. Luke says that on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. So they came to anoint his body, which is what you normally do. And this is something that every single account includes. Women were the first witnesses. Why is that so significant? Well, because it's so embarrassing. In the first century, if you wanted to establish something as a fact, just like today, you needed eyewitness testimony. But unlike today, women weren't thought of as reliable witnesses. A fellow named Josephus, who was a first century Jewish general and historian, he said, "From women let no evidence be accepted because of the levity and temerity of their sex." Just let that sink in for a moment. Women weren't trusted as witnesses. And the Mishnah, the ancient Jewish legal code, it said the same thing. The law governing an oath of testimony applies to men and not to women, to those who are suitable to bear witness and not to those who are unsuitable to bear witness. Do you see the attitude of Jewish people in the first century? Now, forgetting for a moment how sexist that is, can you see why this makes the evidence here so strong? Quite frankly, the women being the first witnesses is just embarrassing. Why would all four gospel writers make women the first witnesses to the resurrection? Unless, of course, it actually happened that way. If they were making these resurrection stories up, this is one of those no-brainers. You would never make women the primary witnesses because you would just get laughed at. And in fact, this is exactly what happened. One of the famous second century critics of Christianity, Celsus, he wrote, "After death, he rose again and showed the marks of his punishment and how his hands had been pierced. But who saw this? A hysterical female. People dismissed the Christian story for exactly this reason, that women were the primary witnesses. But for modern historians, people in our age, that gives the stories the ring of truth. It's this very fact that makes the Gospels believable. If the early Christians were just making up stories about Jesus rising from the dead, they would never have cooked this up as the beginning and foundation of their story. It would be like sitting in the witness stand at court and beginning your testimony with, well, once upon a time. People would just laugh. They'd think you were foolish. So ironically, something that ancient people would find laughable is actually good evidence that what the Bible writes here is truthful. They wouldn't have recorded it if it weren't. But there's more to say. There's more than just the testimony of the women. There's also the evidence of the others who were there that day. There were other people around. And I think that quite often when we think about miracles in general and the resurrection of Jesus in particular, we make a massive and wrong assumption about people back in the first century. We assume that they were much more gullible than we are today, that the resurrection was what they expected. But once again, we're just not looking at the evidence. Because when they were confronted with the empty tomb, and with the testimony of the women, and with the testimony of other followers who had seen Jesus, and even with Jesus standing right in front of them, the early Christians were just like modern skeptics. They didn't want to believe. Their reactions ranged from outright unbelief to skepticism to confusion. Just like us, they needed to be convinced this was really true, and they tried to explain it away in other ways. So when the women came back and said that the tomb was empty and Jesus had risen, what did the others do? Oh, they believed and everything was wonderful, of course. No, they didn't believe. Why? Because like anyone today, it sounded ridiculous to them. At least one person did check them out though. Peter, also called Simon, he got up and he ran to the tomb, and bending over he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away wondering to himself what had happened. Peter ran off to the tomb to check it out. He saw the women had told the truth. So he immediately believed, right? No, he didn't believe the women. Just like someone today, he went away wondering what was going on. He was confused, but not convinced. He didn't just jump to the conclusion that the women were right about Jesus rising. And after all of this, what's the response of the followers of Jesus? Well, Luke says they were downcast. Downcast? Haven't they just been told that Jesus has risen? Haven't they just been told by Peter that the women were right, the tomb was empty? And they're depressed? Why are they depressed? Later on, a couple of them bump into Jesus himself while they're walking along the road. And at first, they don't really recognize Jesus. But when they finally do figure out who they're talking to, they rush back to tell everyone they've met Jesus. And Luke tells us that while they were still talking about this event, Jesus himself stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. So they've got the word of the women. They've got the word of Peter, Simon is Peter. They've got the word of the two blokes who met Jesus walking along the road. They've got all this evidence piling up. So when Jesus finally makes an appearance to all of them, their reaction is joy, right? They embrace him and all is well. No, just like we would be, they are shocked and frightened. So what would you think if a dead friend or relative appeared in front of you right now? Well, you'd think you'd seen a ghost, wouldn't you? Or you'd think you'd had an hallucination, and that's exactly what these first Christians thought. Do you see what's going on? The early followers of Jesus weren't more gullible than us. They weren't more ready to believe anything they were told. They were just as skeptical and doubting and confused as we would be, as we are today. They weren't more gullible than we are. They were just convinced by the evidence. And they wrote it down so that we can see that, so that we can see they were absolutely convinced that Jesus did rise from the dead. And they were so convinced, they wrote it down 4 times. That's another piece of the evidence, by the way, for the truthfulness of Jesus' resurrection. The 4 separate and different accounts in the 4 Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all write about Jesus rising from the dead, but their accounts are quite different. Now, a lot of people have trouble with this. They think the different accounts show that the story can't possibly be true. But once again, if you ask an historian, the opposite is the case. It's actually more convincing. Let me tell you a story, a true story this time, to illustrate what I mean. Several years ago, when I was living in Sydney, I had a Saturday job with a butcher down in Kirrawee. On my very first day of work, I was driving down the Princess Highway early in the morning in a thick fog, when ahead of me I saw a beautiful maroon Jaguar driving erratically. It crossed all 3 lanes on our side of the highway, over all 3 lanes on the other side, and then back again. And I thought to myself, man, this guy is drunk and he's dangerous. He was driving slowly, so I passed him and I thought that was it. I thought, oh, I've got away, dodged a bullet. Then a couple of k's down the road, I stopped at a set of lights, and sure enough, a few seconds later, I hear the sound of brakes, and then bang, there was the Jag embedded in the back of my car. I got out and started walking back to the Jag, when another car pulls up, and 2 guys get out really angry. They said, he hit us before he hit you. He's drunk. We need to get him out before he kills someone. So together we approached the driver's window. And the window slowly comes down, and immediately you could tell something wasn't right with this guy. I couldn't smell any alcohol, but he was completely out of it. His head was weaving, his eyes were all glazed. It turns out he was extremely high on something. This guy was so far gone, he couldn't even respond to us when we were speaking to him. And the 2 guys are yelling at him, "Get out of the car, you idiot, you're drunk, you're going to kill someone." I just kind of looked at him and said, "Are you all right, mate?" After a few seconds, he just kind of shakes his head and then takes off. He floors it. So we jump in our cars and we take off after him. And there's this car chase in the fog through the streets of Rockdale. But he's gone. He's going so fast in the fog, we haven't got a hope. We keep going, but yeah, there's no chance for us. Well, we caught up with him a couple of k's further down the road. He'd gone through a major set of lights and completely collected another car. And he was sitting in the middle of the intersection, stopped. And I pull up behind him, and the car with the 2 blokes pulls up in front of him, and we get out and we start approaching the Jag because we think we've got to get him out of this car. Well, lo and behold, the door opens and the guy gets out himself. And he's wearing a rebel bikie jacket and he has a gun sticking out of his pants. We all went, whoa, and retreated to a safe distance. And stumbling and weaving, he kind of disappears down the road on foot. Now, as you can imagine, someone called the cops, and as soon as they mentioned the gun word, the cops were there in seconds. There were cops everywhere. And one of them gets out a notebook and begins to take our statements. Now, what's it like when you witness something like that? Something exciting and quick and a bit frightening? Well, some things stick very clearly in your mind. I remember things about the way he looked, what he was wearing, how he acted, as clearly as if it were yesterday. And this happened over 20 years ago now. But other things I didn't notice then or don't remember so well, I'm a bit more fuzzy on. But taking all the different statements with different people seeing different things and remembering different things as important, the police build up a pretty complete picture of what went on. The multitude of different accounts, of different witnesses noticing different things in different ways, well, it turns out that makes for solid evidence. And this is exactly what's going on with the different Gospels. If we just had one account of the resurrection, we'd have more reason to doubt, wondering what the others actually thought. Or if all the Gospels read exactly the same way, we would rightly say this doesn't ring true. It sounds as if they just made it all up and colluded together as they wrote. But the accounts don't all read the same way. They show different perspectives and different memories, and they highlight different things they thought were important. The different writers pick and choose what to include in order to make sense of their testimony, all of which makes their evidence ring true. And you can see this even within Luke's account. Luke tells us that Peter went to the tomb to check things out for himself after the women came back. And you might assume, as you read that he did that alone. But he didn't. Others went with him to the tomb. You see that later on in the story, where the two men say that some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said. In John's Gospel, he actually records at least one other person running to check the tomb along with Peter. Luke just didn't feel the need to include every detail at every point. And it's these features, these differences in the stories that make the claim that Jesus truly rose from the dead more compelling and more believable. So there we have it. Luke gives us a lot of credible evidence, eyewitness evidence, that Jesus has in fact risen from the dead. And along the way, he deals with doubts and skepticism and objections just like ours today. So it makes you ask, what are the credible objections to the resurrection? What credible reasons are there to doubt that it happened? And the answer might surprise you, because the answer is there are no plausible reasons to doubt the testimony of the early Christians. Ed Sanders of Duke University is a professor in the US. He's not a Christian. Ed Sanders is, however, an expert in this period of ancient history and has written books on Jesus and history. He's a skeptic, and he says this: that Jesus' followers, and later Paul, had resurrection experiences is, in my judgment, a fact. What the reality was that gave rise to the experiences, I do not know. Now, Ed Sanders has no doubts as an historian about the testimony of the early Christians. He has no doubts about their claims. But he doesn't want to believe that the resurrection actually happened. So his answer is, it just didn't. I don't know why. I can't explain it. There must be some other explanation. I don't know what it could be, but I just don't want to believe it. And incidentally, I want you to notice this deals with a lot of the other skeptical nonsense about the resurrection, like claims the early Christians were all hallucinating at the same time, or engaging in some magic mushroom trip, or it was all just kind of wishful thinking. Serious historians like Sanders, despite not being Christians themselves, think all of that is just rubbish. The testimony of the early Christians stands up to scrutiny. It is not just gullible nonsense. And so the question for you is, if you doubt the resurrection, why do you doubt? Because the evidence points towards the fact that Jesus really rose from the dead, not the other way. So why do you doubt? I want to finish by speaking to the voice of doubt that perhaps exists inside your doubts. For those of us who doubt whether Christianity is true, who doubt the resurrection of Jesus, I want to ask, do you doubt your doubts? Is there a voice of doubt there that nags away and says, could it really be true? Because, friend, it could really be true. I think it is true. The evidence points that way. So is there a voice that says, why am I doubting this? Am I doubting because I don't want to admit that I was wrong? Am I doubting because if I admit it's true, it will change my life? Am I doubting because I don't want to give up some stuff I like doing? And if that's you, I want to urge you today to listen to that voice of doubt inside your doubt. Take a look at the real Jesus and think about what it would mean to trust the evidence. And of course, that's not the end, because if Jesus really did rise from the dead, that means something. But you'll have to wait until our next episode to find out what.
Thank you, Seno. I think that was some pretty convincing evidence for the resurrection. You might agree with us, you might not agree, and you might have more questions about that. If you do, please feel free to put them in the comments on Facebook or YouTube. We've got lots of great questions already. But before we get to those, we're going to have a toilet break. So feel free to go to the loo if you need to, or grab some food or a cuppa and enjoy these photos that we've collected for you. Okay, we're back. I hope you guys enjoyed your little stretch and your food or your drink if you got one. We are into our question time now. And the first question is the same question that I asked Haley and everyone who's out there watching at the start. Have you guys had any interactions or encounters with Australian wildlife, magpies or otherwise?
Lots. You want a gross one or a funny one?
Funny, I think.
Okay. So there's lots of magpies here in town, and particularly on campus, and they're really smart birds. Oh, and how scary are they when they sharpen their beak on something? Like they swish it like how you sharpen a knife. Anyway,
Not good.
so scary. But they know where the food is, and I see them standing outside the door to the cafe, and they're waiting for people to come out with food, and then they just go for it. And it's quite funny watching people try to protect their food. But, I shouldn't laugh at other people's misery. But one actually hopped in when the door was open, hopped into the cafe and was just hopping around, like trying to find food, and then it'd have a bit of a fly, and the staff are trying to get it to go out, and then it'd go to the door to try and get back outside, but people were too scared of it to stand there and keep the door open. Anyway, it was just funny watching this magpie, but he knew where the food was.
Yeah. See, they are clever. Wow, that poor little magpie.
They're quite friendly too.
And it's fine.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
They're quite friendly, you were saying?
They're quite friendly too. Like, well, I spent a bit of time in the cow shed, and there's one of them in particular that if you left the door open, would just kind of wander up to the door and look around, walk in, say g'day. I'm just going, don't be an idiot, don't come inside, you'll get stuck. But
do you ever feed him? Is that why they like the cow shed?
I mostly fed them pancakes, which apparently is bad for them, but they liked it. So I have had my fair share of bad encounters with magpies, so I'm happy for the good ones on campus. And there's some at our place that we feed, and they're friendly. But I've had skin taken off my head from a magpie in town. So, yeah,
That's
evil.
So evil. Yeah, evil. Ryan, any notable encounters?
Well, in terms of magpies, just the one that, as I mentioned before, that lives at the bottom of my driveway. So I'm definitely going to try and make friends with it.
You should.
Yeah, it'll make putting out the bins a lot easier. But today, it wasn't a magpie. It wasn't an Australian wildlife either. But Ezra and I got attacked by a duck. He started going towards us because we're at Mercaddy Park, and Ez was chasing ducks. He loves chasing birds. But it's springtime, and there's actually a whole bunch of, I don't know what the term is, but a whole bunch of ducklings. Super cute. But I think the ducks were a bit were protecting, and so had the whole like kind of thing going at me. It's pretty fun. But
gosh.
Did you get away safely?
Yes, yeah. It was fine.
Okay?
The duck wasn't too aggressive. I don't even think Ezra realized.
Oh,
he
cool.
was just doing his own thing.
Oh, that's good.
He found other ducks to chase.
Oh, too good.
I figure if they're going to live in that park, they've got to expect kids chasing them. Like, seriously, if you're going to live in the main park in town.
Yeah. The ones that he was chasing, he chased two for ages, and they were just like casually walking away. They didn't fly. They were just like, yeah.
A duck's not the kind of a bird you want to catch. They're pretty disgusting animals.
It's like the kangaroos up at uni are used to people, and like they just lie around and look at you, going, "What are you looking at?" Kind of
so chill.
smug look on their faces.
They've definitely got some attitude.
Yeah, so true. Oh, thanks, guys. We have got a lot of questions to get into. Also, I forgot to introduce you. So Leslie is below me. I don't know if she's for you guys. Ryan is over there. And Seno
still the pink man, but
oh dear. Seno gave us our talk today. So they're our panel for tonight. Our first question is, it's hard to choose. It's going to be one from last week. and it's from Patrick. And he asks, why is it iconic that the cross is associated with churches? It symbolizes death and bad things. Can't there be nicer things to symbolize churches?
Like pretty flowers.
Yeah. Or most other things.
Or chocolate.
Yes, indeed.
Are you going to give a serious answer, Sano?
I'm waiting for one of you guys to step in and
Well, I mean, it's probably along the same reasons that we call Good Friday, despite a horrible bad thing happening.
Yeah.
We call it Good Friday because we think it's one of the best things to happen for us in terms of what Jesus' death meant. And so I think in the same way, we kind of take what Jesus has done when he died, even though that was a horrible thing, what it means for us, it means a whole lot in a very good way. And so we want to take that on board with us and go far with it.
I think there's also that element of taking something that gets thrown at you and you are laughed at for and turning it into a kind of a symbol that marks you out. So there's a famous cartoon from the first century. Cartoons were graffitied onto walls back then. There's a famous cartoon of a human being with a donkey's head on a cross, and underneath it is the caption, "Alexamenos worships his God," and it's poking fun at Christians who worship a dying person, a dying saviour, and it's like Christians have taken that symbol and owned it as well. So I think there's a little bit of that as well. But I agree with Ryan. It's the purpose of the thing. It's what it actually symbolises, the greatest good ever, and so we're proud of it, I guess.
Do we want to talk more about that greatest good? Because Laura asked, how do we know that Jesus' death paid for our sins? Do we believe what he says, or is there evidence?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it is in a sense a promise, isn't it? You know, we say to people, believe that Jesus died for you and you'll be forgiven. And you go, well, how? How does that work? How do we know that's happened? How do we know that Jesus' death has worked for me, has paid for me, that I'm forgiven? And the answer is actually in what we talked about tonight, Jesus' resurrection from the dead. The reason we know it's true is because he's risen. And we're going to talk about that in much more detail next week.
Cool. Little plug. Sorry, did anyone else want to say anything about that?
No.
Come show up next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Laura also asked, do we know where the tomb is that Jesus was buried in?
I don't know. I think there's a place in Israel that people go to and think that that's where Jesus was buried, but is it the exact one? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I feel like the answer is maybe.
It's probably this one.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Cool. Jen asked, as Jesus is comparing himself to a ghost, does this mean that ghosts are real even though Jesus isn't a ghost?
Oh, interesting.
I've never thought about that before. That's a good question.
So
have you seen the movie Ghost?
No. Should I have?
Famous Patrick Swayze movie with Demi Moore.
Is it good?
It's got a classic scene that people talk about.
It's not good.
All the time. Ditto.
It's like a post-death romantic comedy.
Okay.
It's got Whoopi Goldberg in it as well.
Mentions it. I'm going back to the question.
Oh, sorry,
Thanks,
Leslie.
If Jesus mentions it, or they mention it, then I would wonder if they think that it's real. Like, why would they come up with something that there's no comprehension of?
Yeah. So I've never personally, I don't know about anyone else, but I've never personally witnessed a ghost, but I wouldn't expect most people to have witnessed spirits or ghosts. I know that there are plenty of people who claim to have witnessed or experienced some form of ghost or spirit. And I don't know if I can really doubt all of them. I don't know if I can really
Well-
call all of them psychotic episodes or fantasies or hysteria.
What
I guess it's
about
possible, but I tend to think it's probably true. They're, yeah.
what about in terms of other bits of the Bible? So the dead rose when Jesus, the tombs were open when Jesus died. But then back in Kings, Samuel and Saul and the witch of Endor.
Yeah, 2 Samuel.
1 Samuel 30.
Or 1 Samuel. There you go.
In the Old Testament, yeah. So the spirit of Samuel came back, and
I think as well, the other thing you've got in there is that when Jesus asks who people say that I am, the disciples say, some say this, some say that, some say John the Baptist. And what they mean by that is some people believe that Jesus is not actually a human being. He's a ghost, a spirit that's been raised up by the apostles. The apostles are necromancers, and they've raised the spirit of Jesus to do their bidding. And so that's what some people believed about Jesus. And so it's certainly a belief that's held back then and seems to be credible. I don't see a reason to doubt it. I think if you believe in a non-material realm, if you believe in a realm of spirits and things, then it shouldn't surprise us terribly if that's the case. I think we just tend to explain away any of those things that we encounter.
I think our culture might also be part of that. Like in other cultures, it's much more common and accepted to.
Yes, it's like because we've rejected belief in God, we've necessarily had to reject belief in all other things like that, all other spiritual things connected to it. But as Christians, we don't need to be like that. We don't need to dismiss things out of hand like that. We can just follow, I guess, the evidence where it leads.
Cool. Jess has asked, how do you think the men that Jesus was walking with on the road to Emmaus, were kept from recognizing him? Did Jesus look exactly the same?
I've got a pet theory about this, Ellie. I think Jesus was wearing one of those joke glasses with a fake moustache on.
Oh my goodness.
Or perhaps he was wearing a Zorro mask, or Clark, or Superman's glasses that turn him into Clark Kent.
Oh my word.
Was he wearing one of those Mission Impossible masks where he takes it off? And...
Oh yeah, maybe that. Yeah. We don't
the
really
answer
know.
is obviously don't know.
Yeah, we don't know if he was wearing a hooded cape. We don't know if he was, if he shaved, or we don't know if he just physically disguised himself, or if they were just too preoccupied to actually realise who it was. Quite often you can miss things right in front of your face. And, you don't even realise someone's there, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, okay, there you are. Or you thought it was someone else. So, it's not surprising to me that they were somehow kept from recognising who he was. How they were, I don't know, they don't tell us.
And also, like when you're not expecting it. So when you see someone, you go, I think I recognise you. And then you find out, you do know them and you know them well, but they're in a totally different context. So
like seeing your teacher at the supermarket.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
Like seeing your teacher at the supermarket.
Yeah. Whoa.
Totally out of context. I love the idea of Clark Kent's glasses, except glasses hadn't been invented, but that kind of idea, I just love that,
Yeah, so the answer is don't know. That's what I mean.
Of course we don't know. It's one of those things where they don't actually tell us why it was they didn't recognise him. So, yeah. Yeah,
cool. Ben has asked, when Jesus rose from the dead, how come he didn't heal the scars in his hands and feet?
Good question.
And I have a follow-up question, but answer that one first.
Well, that's part of...
No.
Well, I was just going to say it's part of how he proves who he is.
Yep.
To the disciples and to Thomas.
Yeah, can't even been a lookalike or or anything like that.
That's right. Well, people are already talking about ghosts, and even his disciples, when they see him in the room, invoke ghosts or spirits as an explanation. And so, that makes sense that he would keep them in order to establish who it actually is, that this is genuinely him. It's not some kind of replicant. Some weird doppelganger thing.
And do you think also that, for example, in Isaiah, in the servant songs, how it talks about, by his wounds we're healed. And so the wounds there's something significant about the wounds are showing us that he died, and that through that we do have forgiveness of sins and we are healed.
Yeah. So his wounds represent something that our wounds don't.
Yeah.
And so, will I have that scar from my lip where I bashed into a pole because I wasn't looking when I was 10? Probably not. But these scars are very particular and special and unique.
And I'm also thinking about in Revelation, that picture of the slain lamb. There's that his death is significant, and
it says again what we talked about earlier about the significance of Jesus' death and why we use it as a symbol.
My question was going to be, does that mean that we'll have our scars in heaven? But you kind of answered that one.
Well, I don't know. We're not told. We don't know.
Yeah.
I like to fantasize. Now that I'm in my 50s, I like to fantasize that I'm going to be my 25-year-old, version of myself. But I don't know.
Yeah. Find out when we get there.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. Jen has a great question, which will be our second last question because we are running out of time. She asks, everything you've said, Seno, comes from the Bible. However, people will only believe this evidence if they believe the Bible itself is true. How do we prove, without using the Bible's contents, that the Bible is true so that people can trust it as a source of evidence?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And there's part of me that wants to say you can't. You can't prove that kind of thing to someone. I think you can lay down reasons to think it's credible, and you notice that I did some of that tonight. I talked about the credibility that the people in the text give it, the fact that they put the women as the first witnesses, the way they tell their story from a skeptic's point of view rather from a gullible believer's point of view. All those things lend credibility to what they say and believability to what they say. And so there are things like that. I think you can test the text of the Bible against history. The Bible claims to be an historical book. And so the Bible ought to match history, the history it purports to be part of. And time again, the Bible has held up against critiques that it doesn't match history. Every time somebody's gone, oh no, the Bible doesn't match history here, it's been shown by historical evidence later on to be actually right, which is why serious historians, it's why I brought up Ed Sanders, serious historians who aren't Christians call the Bible primary historical evidence. So whatever else people believe about the Bible, the one thing they do believe about it, if they're serious and they're academic, is that the Bible is credible. They take it as credible historical evidence, as a primary source. It's not fake or made up to them. And so you can believe it's not true, and this is part of the problem. You don't have to believe it's true to think it's... you don't have to believe what it says in order to think it's accurate. But so, in a sense, I think all those things are useful, but they won't necessarily convince your friends the Bible is true. And so that's one aspect. I think another aspect is, though, the Bible's testimony to itself. And this is one of the reasons why we open the Bible with people, because Christians believe the Bible is a book that testifies to itself. If it is God's word, then it will ring true to people. And so in a sense, I can't convince you. I can't turn you around so that you'll go, oh, yes, I trust the Bible is the word of God. There's a reason Christians believe that, and it's because they've come to the Jesus of the cross and the resurrection.
Mm.
And so we trust. And so there's a bit of a circle there that you can't just open up to people, which is why we read the Bible. So one of the most famous Christian theologians said this thing about the Bible, that it is its own testimony, and reading it is a thing that convinces you. That's certainly true of me. I was converted reading the Bible, and that's the testimony of so many people. And so my recommendation to you, if you've encountered someone who you're thinking, well, how would I even get them to actually credit the Bible, I would say see if you can get them to read the Bible and read it with you. So that was a very long-winded answer. I don't know if anyone else has got something to add.
I was just going to add to that, but that listen to like proper historians. And there's a number of historians that have written books about it, and not popular culture or what someone down the street thinks. Serious academic historians say about it.
Ryan, you want to add anything, or are you good?
No, I'm good.
Cool. Our last question is from Ben again, and he asks, what does the resurrection mean for us today? Because it happened a long time ago.
And the answer is, tune in next week. So next week is about this very question. We're going to finish off Luke, the ending of Luke, and we're going to look at what the meaning is of the resurrection, not just for religious people, but for everyone on the planet. And so that's what we'll be talking about specifically next week. So bring those questions. It'll be a banger.
Cool. Thanks, guys. And thank you, everyone out there, for sending in your questions. There were a lot of really good ones for tonight. We looked at a lot of evidence for the resurrection, and you might think it's pretty solid. You might think it doesn't add up. But if you want to know why it matters, whether or not it's true, you should join us next week. We'll hope to see you there.
So yeah.